Greetings viewers, for this video I want to talk about Frogwares, one of the most interesting of the new Ukrainian developers. Ukraine is a fascinating country. It's been going through revolutionary changes, and Frogwares is a medium-sized studio and maker of video games. They're most famous for their detective games. They got the license to Sherlock Holmes and have produced a series of sort of indie titles that are based on Sherlock Holmes and their interactive experiences. You get to play as Sherlock and do detection and do detective work and whatnot. Well, the studio went in a new direction after 2016 and took on a much bigger project, and that is their current video game, which just came out this year, called The Sinking City. Now, the very first thing which needs to be said, I highly recommend The Sinking City. If you have any spare cash, if you are interested in any kind of horror experience, if you know anything about H.P. Lovecraft and love his science horror fiction, cosmic horror fiction, The Sinking City is for you. It's not a perfect video game, it has some minor issues or whatnot, but it's a wonderful example of an independent developer really hitting it out of the park. H.P. Lovecraft is a complex writer with a lot of contradictions, and one of the things that Frogwares did was to get Lovecraft right. I like to say that it took a Ukrainian developer to get Lovecraft right, and there's a good reason for this. Now, I explain more in the article, but I'll give you the summary right here. H.P. Lovecraft is actually one of the most misunderstood writers out there today. A lot of people assume that he's a writer of the occult or that he's an extreme right-winger and a revanchist, and actually that's not true on either count. Personally, Lovecraft's personal politics were very problematic, deeply racist, xenophobic, yes. However, in the context of the 1920s and 1930s, when he wrote his great works, Lovecraft was an intelligent conservative. He was not a mindless fascist. So you cannot accuse him of being something that he wasn't. We can critique the conservatism and the toxicity of the xenophobia and whatnot, but as a writer, his great texts are actually fantastic, and that's because they're critical of empire. Who knew that an intelligent conservative could be a critic of the empire? Is that even possible? Of course it's possible. It happens all the time. What it is that texts sometimes know more than the authors themselves. Great quote from Heinermuller. Sometimes the material itself is more progressive and the writer doesn't really realize what they're doing, but they end up kind of expressing something that's profoundly true. Lovecraft's deal was that he was deeply skeptical of the rising American empire, and he wrote horror fiction, and not just any horror fiction, he wrote science horror fiction. So his stories are always about archives, they're about detection, they're about finding secrets out, but there's nothing occult about them. Everything has a reason. So he's writing science fiction, and you can actually think of his work productively. Like, the best way of thinking about Lovecraft is he's writing stories which are the opposite of the happy space opera. Space operas are comedies, and they're the Wild West in outer space, and there's a happy ending where all the aliens and the humans live together under some benevolent American empire. Lovecraft doesn't buy that. He's like, no, this is going to end badly, there's going to be problems. And so he critiques that in his own complex way. Now, this makes the theme of creating a video game based on Lovecraft really difficult. Frogwares succeeds amazingly well. Part of it is they do the hard work of creating a New England environment. They create a fictional city loosely based on Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston, Massachusetts, and the other. And there's some very fine voice acting. They have an excellent script. So the script writers are to be commended. The voice actors do a fine job. By the way, I could not find any documentation on who did the voice acting, but they did a fantastic job and had really gotten that Northeastern accent right, which surprised and impressed me. So a lot of details, a lot of love and care and attention went into the atmosphere of the game. The other thing about the video game is it's an open world adventure, and it does something interesting by mixing up the detective story. In fact, you are a detective. You play as a detective named Charles Reed. And that's a significant name, and the character is a reference to some real-life journalists of the 1920s, 30s, and so forth. One of the themes of the stories is that you basically play the role of a citizen journalist trying to understand what's going on with the madness overtaking the city. And so you play the role of a detective, but also as a historian, archivist, etc. So again, there's that science fiction feel that the designers really got right. The other important thing that the designers got right, and I won't spoil anything else, it's an experience you should have for yourself. They got it right because Ukraine is at war. during an anti-colonial war to defend themselves against Russian imperial invasion. And that concentrated minds wonderfully all across Ukraine. And the developers, I think, took that energy, that anti-colonial insight, and they fused that with Lovecraft's critique of empire. And the result is magic. It's horrifying, it's baffling, it's Lovecraft-esque in the best sense, but it's deeply critical of empire. And there's this empathy for the ordinary human beings who are the victims of empires. All of Lovecraft's stories have that empathy for the victims. You feel sorry for these poor folks. Some of them are not necessarily human beings or caught up in this madness through no fault of their own. And Frogwares gets that right. So a huge, yes, 5 stars out of 5 for Frogwares. And if the developers, by the way, are watching this video, first of all, congratulations for the project. But second, I would really urge you seriously to think about expanding on the universe. You did so much, which was so right with Lovecraft. Don't be afraid to dream big and make your next project even bigger. Take the Cthulhu mythos and really run with it. You have what it takes to make something really, really special. Don't be afraid to take a risk and do something even bigger in the future.